Howdy ho guys, it's Bo again, and welcome to another Bojan vlog. In this entry, I wanted to talk about something that's related to like my recent videos I've done, where I've talked about kind of trusting in your experience, right? And that kind of trusting your experience message or teaching that I have is reflective of my kind of personal exploration, you could say, that I'm kind of undergoing at the moment in my life, right? Because, just to give you a bit of background as well, as I've touched upon in previous videos, I've kind of gone through my journey where it's kind of like ultimately trusting. I use that. I love that. I love the way that I worded that, trusting in your experiences, because ultimately that is what I have been developing, essentially, like throughout my journey, right? You know, what I have basically developed over my journey is increasing self-trust, right? You know, it started with me essentially saying fuck off to like the standard path. You know, I realized that the standard path was not for me, and you know, it was kind of like having the confidence and building the confidence to start to trust in my own thinking, right? So you know, I developed independent thinking, and then slowly that kind of transitioned into like that grew into like, you know, designing my own life, you know, and following my own life path, and then that eventually grew into like analyzing the way that I felt, right? You know, because the next point was then realizing that, you know, okay, I have all of these emotional things within me, and you know, I should probably take a look at that, right? So I started to delve into emotions, and then to a larger extent spirituality. You know, I started to question even the nature of existence, right? And if you're on this kind of path, this probably sounds familiar to you. You know, this is kind of, well, in my case, this is the order in which it happened, but you know, these are kind of the themes that we deal with on the journey of, you know, spiritual awakening, self-actualization, personal development, right? And my latest kind of exploration has been with, well, it has been emotional, right? But it has been kind of this, like, basically like this idea of presence, right? So, you know, I've introduced this idea of presence, and to my mind there are kind of two definitions of presence, right? You know, and the first being kind of, which is the one that I'm talking about, where it is to do with unconditional feeling, right? And typically, if like within the fields of you know, spirituality, self-development, personal development rather, we focus on kind of feeling better, right? You know, that is generally what has been traditionally the message in personal development and self-help and things like that, spirituality, new age spirituality, you could say. And you know, to an extent, you know, that's kind of good, right? You know, and you can like, you know, I try to kind of give that kind of a progressive kind of like kind of tone in my videos. You know, like, you know, I kind of try to tailor my ideas in the form of kind of like how to move forwards in life, you know, and that is kind of a practice in my own life. You know, that is ultimately why I'm doing any of the things I'm doing. Aside from my love of doing them, it is to like, you know, to try and get my life into life circumstances into a better place, right? As more aligned with, you know, my happiness, right, and fulfillment. But you know, as I outlined in my previous videos where I talked about it, you know, I realized that that basically, you know, no matter what happens in life, you know, like, yes, we have these plans, we have these grandiose plans, where we want to achieve things, but then when we suffer setbacks in life, like, you know, you still go through the motions of like anger and negativity and sadness and depression, and you know, and I spent quite a lot. Well, I spent the majority of my life essentially, even before I started on this journey, just kind of resisting. And you know, doing all sorts of kind of like self deprecating things to myself, you could say, like damaging, self-hating things to myself in response to these things, right? And essentially, I realized that I realized that, like, all of this spawns from a desire to basically be good, essentially, and this kind of ties into what I want to talk about. But like, when we're early on the spiritual journey, or even before we go on the spiritual journey, but we have this inkling of we want to be good human beings, right? We like, they're all, life is fucking confusing, and all I want to do is to do things right. That is basically the mentality of everyone, kind of before they kind of go through the realization process and all of that stuff. It is, they just want to live life the right way, where they can be happy, and they can essentially, like, stop feeling so much pain in their lives and that kind of thing, right? But initially, what happens is we get overly attached mentally, because, like, mentally is how we initially latch onto these ideas of of abundance, of high vibration, of love, of enlightenment, and so, like, what happens is we kind of start to build these kind of these kind of conceptual structures of how we think enlightenment should look, or happiness should look, and we try to, like, meet those standards, right? And things might go okay for a while, but then eventually what happens, and this is what happened to me, is like we realize that we've been doing to ourselves the same thing that we've always done to ourselves, which is to judge ourselves. Like, it becomes just another thing to basically chastise ourselves over. It's like I couldn't fucking live life properly. That was the way I felt. It's probably the way that many people feel. Like, I was a reject in life. I was a reject on the standard path of life. Like, I was a reject in many ways. And now that I'm on the spiritual path, like, it gave me, like, some temporary kind of, like, feelings of joy and happiness and alignment and connection with myself. And again, and those still persist, but there is still a level where, like, I'm still fucking up. Like, even with all of this amazing knowledge and all of this awareness and all of these concepts and this broad perspective that I now have, I'm still miserable. Like, I'm still miserable. I'm still angry at times, and like, and I just feel like fucking shit and, like, worthless, at times. And it's like, there came a point where I was just like, you know what? Life is ups and downs. I've always kind of known it, but maybe it's finally time for me to actually surrender to it, right? And that's what I did, right? That's what I started to do, and it is the way forward, right? There are kind of teachers already teaching this, like Teal Swan and Matt Kahn are very obvious examples that I have in my head. And the future of spirituality, you could say, or just this kind of thing, is emotional. I don't want to use the word mastery because it implies control and that kind of thing, but rather emotional healing could be a way of putting it, but, like, just emotional intelligence, right? It is, and obviously that goes beyond, like, far beyond what that moniker kind of implies, like emotional intelligence, because it really encompasses everything about your life. How you live your life, how you feel about life. Everything. Everything that goes on in your life comes back to the way that you feel, right? And from this, obviously, in my previous videos, I've divulged ideas about kind of allowing yourself. So as I state, the two kind of components of tapping into your sensitivity, which is my central teaching, is going in the direction of your joy, and then going in the direction of your pain and accepting it, right, and integrating it, right. And so, and obviously, part one is what I was talking about in terms of allowing yourself. So, where we have been holding ourselves back in terms of the things that we want in life, and judging those things as bad or selfish, or things like that, we start to lift that kind of crushing block on those and start to indulge ourselves in that which makes us feel good, right? And then, in this entry, basically, I want to talk about the other half of that, right? Because I've talked about it to a certain degree in previous videos. You know, there was a video. Well, I've done some of it in my Lego Mobo sessions, right? And I'm actually do one after this, but there was one video where I went where I kind of displayed my anger, which was called like Unleash Your Anger, basically. So if you want to watch that, that's quite a cool, like at least entertaining video to watch, I guess. But I wasn't really that angry, but you know, yeah, I did let it out. But again, this goes back to the idea of presence, right? This goes back to the principle of presence, right? Because as we go through this spiritual journey, we realize that the things that are there in our lives are never going to go away, right? And the paradigm by which we tried to deal with them before, which was to suppress, to become insensitive to energy, to kind of narrow our kind of range of feeling, has not been serving us, right? And that was the case in my life, and I dare say, you know, in everyone's life, right? You know, and so there comes a turning point where you're like, okay, fuck this, you know. I've tried suppressing and resisting and trying to manipulate and control my feelings forever, and this shit is not going to go away, you know. Like I'm still gonna love the things I love, even though some of them I've shoved so far down the rug, like under the rug, that it's seeped into the floorboards, you know. Like, you know, guilty pleasures and like perverted sexual things like that, and also, you know, when I suffer setbacks or like people trigger me or like, you know, something happens in life that just causes this emotional fucking like explosion within me of anger, rage, of depression, despair, you know, things like that. And these things are never going to go away. And so, you know, if that's the case, let it take me, right? And the kind of final frontier of this, like in terms of the kind of final kind of last line of defense, you could say, is half the times it's the way that we perceive ourselves, right? Because another kind of idea that I threw onto you guys is there was a video that was entitled which one was it? I think it was, I forget the exact title actually, but it was one where I talked about like the way that basically when we start to unravel our kind of problems, you could call them shadows, you know, and we, you know, do shadow work and things like that, inner child work, then we start to realize that a lot of the problems that we've had actually spawn from a place that we've always judged as bad, but is actually a subconscious creation of ours that was made in response to a traumatizing kind of set of experiences or feeling state, and that's basically, yeah, it was the humanity is a pitfall species video, where I talked about the pitfall of like how we get stuck, like, you know, we start our journey basically like viewing like, you know, certain traits about us to be bad or like unacceptable or whatever it is. In my case, it was like being a timid person, like cowardly, lazy, unmotivated, and all of those things. But then you start to realize as you keep unfolding is that perhaps there is no one but yourself who perpetuates that, right? And that is like a massive revelation. When you realize that maybe the reason that I'm timid and cowardly and afraid of success is because I'm somehow contributing to that, right? Perhaps it is something that I set in place, like because of like potentially a fear of what might entail what success might entail, or something of the sort, you realize that kind of trait was something that you subconsciously installed, right? And that is kind of related to what I'm talking about here, which is basically for many of us, the kind of last line of defense, which is kind of in a way coincident with like the kind of what I've been describing, which is like the point of surrender, where you're just like, I've gone through the spiritual journey, I've got all, I've built all this stuff for myself, whether that be physically or ideologically, and I still feel like shit. And I'm still not happy because, there are things that I've judged as bad that I really want. I've suppressed my desire. I don't allow myself. I resist. And basically with that moment of surrender comes this kind of, for me it happened kind of afterwards slightly, but basically I realized that I was attached to this image of being good, right? And basically, really, the idea that I had for this video was that I was going to kind of get worked up and stuff like that, and I might very well do as I end it, but to give an example, so at work, right, I basically do customer service, right, at the moment for my work, for my job, and sometimes if you've ever worked in a customer service environment, it's the kind of standard that you're kind of expected to uphold is ridiculous, because it's if you've ever worked in a customer service environment, you'll know that even if you maintain a positive attitude, some customers might not want it. They might hold that in contempt, or they might be suffering from their own problems or whatever, and thus they return your positivity with negativity, right? And so you're expected to kind of uphold this positive attitude, even in the face of people essentially spewing their negativity into your face, right? And in addition to this, processes might go wrong, problems might arise, and stress levels increase when particularly during this period, when commercial kind of goals need to be met and things like that. And what's funny is that in my personal experience, although I do, obviously in a job you kind of have to do the bare minimum to to show that you're a good employee and all that stuff, but so that they don't fire you essentially, but essentially, obviously, the things I teach, I uphold in my own life, right? I'm going through the same thing in my life, where, I never abandon my feelings anymore, right? So, trusting in yourself, allowing yourself, being unconditionally present with your feelings means you don't, abandon your feelings for anything, right? That doesn't mean screw at customers necessarily. It doesn't mean screwing at your colleagues. It doesn't mean throwing everything to the wind and being unreasonable or crazy, right? But it means that when I'm for example, in my job, if I'm angry or stressed, I know better than to suppress it, right? But then with that comes the kind of self combat that occurs when you have an expectation of being a good person, right? And I've always had this expectation, and I'm sure that if you're typically an empath or a nice passive person or that kind of thing, or that kind of person, you probably relate to this as well, where you kind of you fear your negative emotions, or and specifically your kind of explosive emotions like anger and vengeance and things like that. Contempt. You view these kind of explosive, aggressive, negative emotions like they're the fucking plague. For 20 years of my life, and this is funny, but I have various kind of, obviously there are things that I have phobias, for example, I have things that I'm scared of. And, those things could happen to me, and most of them are physical, right? But for many years of my life, the fear of being angry in front of other people, or having, and having people being affected by my anger or other like aggressive negative emotions like that, far exceeded all of those other things, right? Like, in a way, I would rather die than have to be angry. So like that gives you a kind of an idea of like how bad it was, in terms of like how deeply I suppressed my anger. Like, I was so afraid, like nothing transcended my fear of being angry, like in front of other people, and like other people seeing that and thinking things of me, and like my attachment to being a good person, to being a nice person was just that strong. Like, it was the thing, it was my thing, nothing transcended it, nothing exceeded it. But recently, obviously, I've had the revelation where I realized that, if I'm going to be doing this, if I'm going to be unconditionally present with my feelings, if I'm not going to abandon myself anymore, then I have to let myself go into this shit, right? And so what happened slowly was that, I started to rip apart this perception that I am a good person, right? And again, this is coincidence. This is, this is kind of tied with my fear of being angry in front of other people. And so you can imagine how fucking, like, how inconceivable it was at one point in my life, like to even to be seen by other people as a bad person, right? Like, to be seen as someone who is stroppy, who is moody, who is negative, who holds like really like aggressive, violent, like thoughts against other people, like for example, like me thinking that someone is a dickhead, or, if you'll excuse my language, a fucking cunt, like that kind of thing, right? Like, deathly afraid of that. Like, in the past I would never let anyone see that part of my personality. But as I say, what has been happening recently is, because I made the decision, or rather, decision implies that like it was kind of like a mental thing, like a thing of willpower. But really, it was just a natural progression of my awakening process, you could say, of my journey of self-actualization. Is that, I was like, well, it got to a point where I was like, you know what? Yes, like, people might see, like, when I'm angry or upset, when I'm triggered in that way, people might see me as a moody person. People might see me, if I ever spoke my mind about how I truly felt about people at times, like, they would think I was an awful person. They would probably never, there's the potential for them never to speak to me again, to like even hold like aggressive, violent thoughts towards me, right? And my good person image would shatter, like, to those people. Even as even right now, when I'm talking to this camera, these blog entries go out into the public, right? They're in the public domain. Anyone can watch these videos. My image will be shattered, right? But the message and, well, the kind of the teaching that is behind this is of such importance. Because when you're triggered, right, when you're angry, when you're negative, right, you have a choice, right? You can suppress, or you can express. And by express, I don't mean like punching another person necessarily, but at the very least, you have to, like, you have that choice, right? And for many of us, for me, in my case, 20 years of my life, 20 odd years, that's what I did, right? I suppressed. And I realized that wasn't working anymore, so I gave myself permission to be angry, and to not be concerned about whether or not people, like, saw me as angry or not. You know, like, I will not suppress my anger, right? I will not suppress the thoughts that arise from that anger, right? I will let the anger completely burn through me, right? Like, I will not abandon myself, right? Because you will reach a point where you realize, where you will start to question, is the image of me being a good person, a morally just person, a person that people can rely on to be emotionally soft and amiable, is that worth me suppressing and abandoning myself? Right? Because you can make the choice to suppress and abandon yourself, but like no one else is going to feel the effects of that but yourself, right? And there comes a point where you're met with that question, basically, right? To continue suppressing and to continue to feed into the idea that I have to be a good person in order to win people's favor or whatever it is, or launch yourself or just allow yourself to be a bad person. So what? People think I'm a fucking bad person because I fucking say like bad words like fucking cunt and bitch and shit like that. Or even that I want to kill this person right now because they're pissing me off so much, or whatever it is, right? I will not suppress myself. I will not abandon myself any further. And when you start to do this, it will transform your life. Because for once in your life, you will feel liberation. For once in your life, you will feel no longer a victim to life. You know, you will start to cultivate that which is essential in trusting life and experience, right? And you'll start to feel that you know, a lot of us in the spiritual field like strive towards enlightenment and transcendence, right? This is how you attain it, right? Well, I don't even like that word own. You know, you don't abandon yourself. You know, even in situations where, you know, it is unlawful, well, I hesitate to say that, but where it is unsavory to do so, where like it is against public opinion, public etiquette, do not abandon yourself. You know, do not suppress. Like, you know, do not abandon yourself, you know, because suppression is abandonment. Whenever you try and stuff down your anger or any negativity, it is abandoning yourself, right? And you really have to ask yourself, is it worth all of the hot air, you know, all of the fucking like ridiculous, like superfluous shit of like, oh yeah, people might see me in some way now. Like, is that worth abandoning yourself? And in my case, it isn't. And, you know, that's what I hope for you to kind of consider, you know, yourself. You know, that is the root of it. It is, are you going to abandon yourself or not when it comes down to it? And so that is the question I'm going to leave you with, because my camera's about to die. I wanted to do like a more expressive entry. I guess like next time I'll do another entry along the lines of this. I also wanted to do a Lego Mobo session about something related to this. But on top, you know, or below, you know, like kind of overseeing this is like a kind of much bigger realization I've been having that, you know, I will share with you in future entries about just stuff, life, you know, the usual thing I talk about. So cool. My message to you in this video is not to abandon yourself, you know, to like, you go in the path of your joy, you allow yourself, you listen to your desires, you know, you start to heal yourself in that way. But also, when you're triggered, when you're angry, you don't abandon yourself. Even if it means like you have to go on the offensive and people will perceive you in a negative light, you lose your image of being a good person and you might lose their favor. That might happen. But are you willing to do that in expense of yourself? Are you willing to abandon yourself? Don't abandon yourself. Be present with your pain and your anger. And own it and let it empower you, right? So cool. That was my entry. I will continue it next time. I hope you're having a good day, and peace out.